began with an exposition of God's character and how those three things related to God's character. And the reason I want to just emphasize that for a moment is because that characteristic way of beginning a discussion of mercy and forgiveness and repentance and this sort of thing is so out of tune with contemporary Western society, in which God's character is not at all part of the discussion, but only humans and their inabilities and their abilities. And so just to lift up this fact that to begin with the character of God is something so distinctly religious that it sets it deeply apart from almost any discussion we have in the public sphere about justice, mercy, or forgiveness, and particularly those that arrange around law enforcement and that sort of thing. And of course, what that leads to the second thing is that, and I will make this note too, if all three religions agree, as they appear to, about justice, mercy, and forgiveness being characteristics of God, there's a slight difference. Hanan presentation brought out this idea that mercy is something learned somehow, a new strategy. I do note that in Hebrew and in Arabic they're almost the same word, right? But they all begin with that. But it seems to me that from the words that we heard, the understandings of humanity are somewhat different. And in fact, we heard a different vocabulary to describe humanity in each of the different religions. And this may be a key into understanding some of their differences. I'm going to try to summarize what I heard. And of course, that as a summary, it would be incomplete and inaccurate. It may be helpful. Which in Rabbi Schlesinger's presentation, it seems that human beings are inclined to sin but are teachable. Is that fair? Okay. In the next presentation, it seems that humans are dominated by sin and they are not teachable enough at all to get to a point where they might be treated mercifully. And the terms came up in my own study of Islam. I think these are typically Islamic terms for referring to humans as weak and ignorant. But teachable, but weak and ignorant. Is that fair? Yeah. So we have three different views of what a human being is in relationship to almost the same view of God. And then I think I heard, and I'm going to make this my first question, I think I heard three rather different views of how human beings could be transformed in such a way that they could live with God's judgment or God's justice. It seems like we heard in the Jewish presentation that a moral education combined with the ritual of repentance were the ways in which human beings could come up to the place where they could live in a just world. And this would come in the Messianic age finally, but in the meantime there are provisions. Again, Doug stressed for us that for Christians, the transformation comes as Christians experience God's love in the cross. And this is the transforming factor that somehow makes humans capable of living in light of God's justice. And there's more to that, I know, second Christianity too, but that's the one sentence thing. And what I gathered from the Muslim presentation, with its many, many quotes from the Quran, is, of course, that somehow the appearance of the Quran, the event of the Quran, as the means of the true guidance of humanity, is what transforms humans to be capable of repenting and living with God's justice. There's probably much more to be said of all those things, but we don't have time to say them all. But clearly the Quran is absolutely central, just as the cross is central for Christianity. And interestingly enough, it seems like in Judaism, not just the Torah on Mount Sinai, but the continued instruction of the Jewish people to be God's, use the word, proxies in the world, instructing the rest of humanity. So in a certain sense, the event of the Torah carried forth through the Jewish people becomes the central, critical part of this transformation. That's fair. So here's the questions, and I'm going to ask all three questions, but not ask that you answer all three of them. But maybe you can pick the one you think is the trickiest or most useful.
The easiest.
The easiest, right? The one that struck me most, because I didn't hear anybody really speak to it, is this one. What is the origin and sustaining power of human sin? what went wrong at the beginning, that humans, including Adam, sinned, okay? And why, after several interventions by God, does it keep going wrong? Why didn't the first time sort it out? Cain and Abel, or the flood, or why does this sin problem keep recurring? And let's start. The second the second question is really just for you, which I didn't get clearly, is how does the cross satisfy God's demand for justice? How can one death, a particular human death, accomplish this thing that we do not use the word atonement that we use in Christian theology? And why didn't any other death, a million people died on crosses, why wouldn't any one of them record? The third question I want to ask you to consider is, what is the role of final judgment in understanding God's character? Not where humans end up, but particularly in Islam and Christianity, there's a concept of a final judgment. What does that tell us about the character of God? Judaism, we want to clarify that. And finally, a word that is very common in Christian vocabulary, and so common that it struck me that I did not hear it in any of the three presentations, is discussion of God's holiness, and how the term holy applies to the terms justice, just, merciful, and forgiving. Okay, so those are my four questions. And I think what we ought to do maybe